Hi, my name's Will Murray. I'm going to talk about 6 lessons that I learned working in EdTech over the last 10 years. I started with a reseller business in 2007 that was a management buyout of a university company. We were reselling Turnitin and selling e-learning services to universities in the UK. We got the company to the point where we had 98% adoption levels in the UK and started to grow it into Europe. I sold that business to Turnitin in 2010, where I became the VP of International and built a reseller network worldwide. Later on, I also became the VP of Product and helped develop the Grade Anywhere suite of products. In 2014, I was part of the executive team that pitched and sold Turnitin to Insight Venture Partners for $750 million, and at that point I became the Chief Product Officer. The team in the Newcastle office, which to this point had managed the international business, started with 8 people in 2007 with about $1 million turnover and grew to about 80 people with 25 million, at which time that was about a third of Turnitin's turnover. There's now 120 to 130 people based in the office in Newcastle, and there's about 350 or so people in Turnitin worldwide. I left Turnitin in 2017, but for now, let's look at the 6 lessons that I learned during this period. So the 6 lessons are based around advice, plans, people, calculated risk, business models, and culture. Advice. You'll find as a startup that you get lots of advice from lots of different places. The secret is to pick on the advice that's actually most useful to you. And to be able to do this, you do need to understand a bit about the areas you're getting advice in. I think a common error is to attempt to outsource your work to another business and not understand enough to actually be able to instruct that business. If you don't understand enough about it to manage it internally, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to instruct somebody properly or even articulate what you want externally. You definitely need to make informed choices rather than just relying on information from other people. In the same way, you will find that you're the only person that cares about your business as much as you do. So when you're given advice, don't necessarily blindly follow it. It may be that the person giving it to you doesn't understand where you're coming from or doesn't understand that much about your business. And I like this quote from Lewis Carroll that talks about this. She generally gave herself very good advice, though she very seldom followed it. What I'm advising you to do is to follow your heart, follow your own advice. So that's lesson 1. Advise yourself. You can't outsource what you can't insource. In other words, if you can't manage it yourself or you can't articulate what you need, you're unlikely to be able to get somebody else to do it for you in a way that's going to work for you. So that was the first lesson that I learned. 2. Plans. I think we've all been in a situation where we've embarked on a new venture or a new product and only a little bit of runway is available to us. We can only see about 3 months into the future. In a traditional context, we'd put together a huge plan for 5 years with a goal at the end, and then put in milestones at various points, and then death march a team through that plan. Of course, the reality is that as soon as you start working on the plan, especially in a technology environment, the milestones move. More of the landscape reveals itself to you. And over time, it becomes the case that you see a different way of doing things, and perhaps the goal itself moves. You may even need to pivot. For this reason, it's actually much more sensible to use an agile methodology of some sort, so that you move things forward in incremental steps, small success at a time. In this way, the path forward actually really is only clear when you get to the end. Then you can trace it back and it all looks logical. I think the same thing is true of innovation. There's 2 books I like in this area, one by Steve Johnson and another by Jeff Colvin. Steve Johnson talks about the adjacent possible, and he's analysed discoveries through history. If you imagine these yellow dots I've got here are innovations or discoveries all linking together, moving into the future across an innovation horizon. And what this says is that a new development is only possible when several other new developments have already been created. Again, when you look at this, you look at something new that's been developed and you look at its path to getting there, it seems obvious when viewed in retrospect. But the truth is that new innovations come about where you have very deep networks and you have a lot of connections and you take on board a lot of different ideas and they form as a slow hunch over time. They don't just appear in some eureka moment. It's about the gathering of evidence, observation, and then your subconscious does a lot of the work for you. And eventually, new ideas emerge. And once again, as I said before, this looks straightforward looking backwards, but it's not easy to plan it out going forwards. So another lesson for me was evolve your plan. The path forward is only clear when viewed backwards. 3. People. People are really important to a startup, and you'll find when you've got a small number of people that you need to hire the right type of people at the beginning. It's really important, in my view, to hire for what I call buzz, which is potential and positivity. You don't want to have negative people in a small team. It can destroy the whole team. You also want to hire for ability. Surprisingly, 10 years ago, this is something I managed to get completely wrong, and we managed to hire a software engineer who was fantastic in all regards, except that he couldn't program. And I was recommended this book, Joel Spolsky's Concise Guide to Finding the Best Technical Talent, and I borrowed some of the ideas for that during our interview process. You also need to hire for potential. You won't probably be able to hire experts in every area for your startup when you first begin, so what you need to do is to hire people who have potential, people who can grow. And for that reason, you need people with a growth mindset. The book I like in this area is actually called Mindset, and talks about people with fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. People with a fixed mindset believe that talent is innate or preordained. They believe that people are born talented or born intelligent. And for that reason, it makes it very difficult for those people to change. If they hit some sort of problem, which happens a lot in startups, if something fails, it's an absolute disaster for them because it means that they're no longer talented, they're no longer uniquely intelligent. Whereas somebody with a growth mindset will take that failure and learn how to do it properly and grow. And that's what you need in a startup, people with a growth mindset. It actually turns out from studies that have been carried out that even hyper-successful people were not born that way. And there's a great book that introduced me to this by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers. Malcolm has studied some of the super successful people and come to the conclusion that people don't rise from nothing. They all do purposeful practice and have meticulous feedback and extreme focus because they had some form of hidden advantage, extraordinary opportunity or cultural legacy that led them to do so. But it's actually that practice that's the important point. Malcolm talks about needing to set aside 10,000 hours or 10 years worth of work in order to become an expert at something. And there's a little bit of disagreement around how much time it actually does take. This is also something that's addressed in Talent is Overrated. But a lot of the work that was done, the original research work in this area, was done by Anders Ericsson, and his book's fairly recently been released and talks about it in more detail. But nevertheless, the principle is the same. You need to put in place a lot of purposeful practice with meticulous feedback in order to become expert at something. Now, this notion of people being able to develop themselves and grow is something that's very close to my own heart. Primarily because something that actually set me on my path forward was back in the home computing era, back in 1985. The home computer scene was booming. I would sit in my bedroom and code rather than play games. I wrote some games, I managed to sell them through a company, I got one on a national magazine cover in the UK. But that grounding in programming is actually what got me into university. It got me teaching programming as a lecturer later on and actually set the basis for my career. So I do believe in this very strongly, and I believe that you should invest in people. Expertise is grown, not born. You should coach and train people. Everybody can grow. It's especially true, I think, as a startup where you need to bring people in with potential who may not already have the expertise. So that's lesson 3. Lesson 4, calculated risk. So I used to play this game with a friend of mine when we were at university, and it was called How Did They Get That Job? And we'd talk about astronauts and newsreaders and a whole range of different people, and it used to be a standing joke. We used to say, how did they get that job? And we had the rather facetious reply, they probably applied for it. But actually this drove me to apply for things that were outside of my comfort zone. I applied to be a lecturer, although I hadn't done a course in teaching, and I did it in parallel and learned how to do that. I did the same thing when I applied to be a head of department at the University of Northumbria. I'd never done it before, I hadn't managed anybody. I didn't lie about it in order to get the job, but I took something on that was just outside of my reach. Similarly, when I did a management buyout of a university company, which enabled me to set up my own business. I'd never done it before, but I did it anyway. So I think lesson 4 for me would be challenge yourself. Do things outside of your comfort zone. I think you'll find that most people who have had any small amount of success in their lives have done this to push themselves forward. 5. Business models. Business models are really important for developing a business. Now, back in the day, Turnitin was originally created to be a peer review system, to enable one group of students to mark the work of another. But what actually happened was that the students started copying work from each other, and that problem needed to be solved first. So what Turnitin does now, it will compare student essays that are submitted to it to a huge database and identify things that are not original. And let me describe how it works and why the business model underneath it is so important. The business model is called network effects, and it works like this. We crawl the web targeted at sites that students use and build up a body of material. Student essays are then submitted for checking and they're compared against that content, as you can see in the left-hand pane here. Then we have an even bigger database because we store the essay and the web content together. At this point, we invited publishers to check their work against the database as well and submit journal articles. We were able to get the publishers to submit their back catalogues, and in fact 80% of the Impact Factor journal content now sits in Turnitin, making the database even bigger, and so it goes on. The important thing here is the business model that drives this, the network effect of it. And let me explain this in a little bit more detail. One web page, one essay, one article, no value. However, when you've got 62 billion pages of content, 750 million essays and 165 million journals, the company's worth 750 million. 2 million instructors, 30 million students and 15,000 institutions later, probably one of the biggest SaaS-based edtech companies in the world. If you're interested in business models, I like this book, Business Model Generation. It's a great route in. And on the product side, Value Proposition Design, which is part of the same series. So lesson 5 for me was build virtuous cycles. Great ideas increase in value with use. If you can find one of those ideas, you're going to have a great business. 6, this is my favourite one, culture. So back in the day, I used to think that success led to happiness when I came out of university. I thought the objective was to make money. Work hard, make money, have minions, rule the world, end up on a yacht with great teeth and a full head of hair. Things didn't turn out quite that way, and these are not my beliefs now. I'll talk about that in a second. I've already covered sort of the last 10 years when I set up the management buyout of N Learning Limited through to selling Turnitin, but my early career started with games programming, being a lecturer at University of Northumbria and then managing a university department. When I managed that department, I had 40 staff. I had no training at all in how to manage staff and I got no coaching. I was actually pretty bad at it, and I did what most new managers do. I thought that command and control was the way forward, that I would just instruct people what they should do and they would do it. It turns out that's not that motivating. So when I left the university with 8 staff to start up a business, I took a completely different tack, something that I've developed over time. And most of the ideas that I got for this new approach came from Drive, a book by Daniel Pink that talks about how you motivate people. I also like the Happiness Manifesto and I mapped that onto Drive. And more recently, a book by Dan Ariely called Payoff, which goes into more detail about motivation and the research that he's done around that. And Daniel talks about 3 things: autonomy, purpose, and mastery. And I like to think of it in the following way. Autonomy is about trust, freedom, and results, rather than mistrust, servitude, and rules. And this is very much about not punishing the many for the faults of the few, and allowing people to operate on their own. So don't have huge policy documents that try and explain in great detail all the rules that people must follow that an HR team then polices. Instead of that, ask people to operate in the best interests of the company and have your HR team cultivate the culture of the company rather than policing policies. In terms of purpose, people are way more motivated if they've got a meaningful purpose, if they're doing something for the greater good. And they're very demotivated if you make their work futile. So if you cancel projects, for example, it's incredibly demoralizing, or you don't recognize work. Similarly, you need a stable environment where people aren't looking over their shoulder all the time. I don't like at all this notion of rank and yank, where people are put on a list and the bottom few are fired. I'm not saying you shouldn't move people on who are negative, who are not pulling their weight, because that can have a positive impact on a team for sure. What I'm saying is you shouldn't make the rule one where you rank everybody and people who just happen to be at the bottom are moved on. In addition, I think it's important to have a clear strategy and stick to it, rather than having impulsive behaviour, which you do see sometimes, people shooting from the hip, especially at the higher level. That can be quite demoralising as well. But there needs to be a clear purpose, and that's the key to that particular component. And then mastery. I've already talked about growth people, growth mindset versus a fixed mindset or a gifted mindset. So you need growth, flow, people need to become masters of their craft. So this requires you to coach them or provide them with training, and then they need recognition. And even simple recognition, just saying thank you will make a huge difference to motivation within a team. So those are the 3 core components: autonomy, purpose, and mastery. And I map against this the components of the Happiness Manifesto. So people become connected. it's important to have social activity and get people to operate together in a social manner. Be active. When we could afford to do so, we subsidised gym memberships to encourage people to go to the gym. We had a scheme whereby people could take days off for charity work to help them give. You should encourage an attitude of gratitude so people take notice of the things around them. And then finally, learning. I mean, certainly as we got bigger, we were able to provide much more detailed learning. We certified all of our development team in agile methods, and also we gave the sales teams SPI training. And I wish we'd been able to do some of that earlier. In fact, it might have been helpful to have done some of that earlier. Encouraging people to keep learning is really important. It doesn't have to just be things which are provided by the company. They should be encouraged to grow themselves as well. We were also fortunate that we were able to develop a working environment for team success with Ben Johnson. We were able to create a really great layout where all the rooms are in the centre so that all the great views of Newcastle were available to the teams that were working together. We created a fantastic office environment that encouraged collaboration with meeting pods, individual working areas, and everybody was using laptops so they could work wherever they want. This is an area where teams from different departments can come and meet together, and you can even work in these spaces if you want to. The culture in this office is absolutely second to none. It's an incredible place to work in the Newcastle office. So whereas at the beginning I felt that success led to happiness, what's changed completely for me is that I now believe that happiness leads to success, both in terms of employees, customers and stakeholders. That's the most important thing for me. So 6, feed the culture. Belonging, buzz and big ideas motivate far more than money. So quickly to summarise: 1, advise yourself. You can't outsource what you can't insource. 2, evolve your plan. The path is only clear when viewed backwards. 3, invest in people. Expertise is grown, it's not born. 4, challenge yourself. Do things outside of your comfort zone. 5, build virtuous cycles. Find something that increases value with use. 6, feed the culture. Belonging, buzz and big ideas motivate more than money. What all of these things have in common is that they represent areas I didn't get right the first time round. So I did some studying and some learning and changed my approach. So my overall advice is keep learning. So those were 6 lessons that I learned over 10 years in EdTech. My name's Will Murray. If you're interested in those books that I mentioned, you can get the lists from tribeslikeus.com. Thanks for listening.